It's absolutely insane, the double standard that's being wielded against the pro-life movement. But I want to talk about the particular trial that your friends just endured, this unjust trial, because the judge. Tell us about some of the injustices during the trial.
I mean, the courtroom was absolutely a clown show from the beginning of the trial. Of course, the whole courtroom was packed with pro-lifers, and the judge was very upset about this. She did not want it publicized. She did not want us there. She treated us horribly the entire time.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Lila Rose podcast. Thank you all for being here. It has been so fun over the last few months to do the podcast and to just see it grow. I mean, there have been so many amazing listeners who have come on board. We just hit 85,000 subscribers on our YouTube. The podcast is growing, and that's because of you. So thank you so much for listening, for sharing the podcast with your friends, with family. It's been great to get messages from a lot of you guys and to get comments from you guys. And also a huge shout out to our new patrons. The Patreon is growing. I'm super pumped about that. You can come and be a Patreon of the show or patron of the show at any level. Of course, I'll take your $100 a month or $1,000 a month, but really at any level, we love having our patrons be part of the show. This helps us produce more episodes and special projects in the future. You can go check out the Patreon at the link in the bio, whether it's through you're listening through podcast or on YouTube. But it's been awesome. It's awesome to be a part of this growing community, and I'm just thankful for you guys. Thank you for listening to the show. Very pumped about all the stuff to come. All right, so this week, there has been a new federal trial started in the District of Columbia prosecuting pro-lifers. You guessed it. The Department of Justice under President Biden loves prosecuting pro-lifers. These pro-lifers are being charged with violations of the FACE Act, which is a law that was put into place in the early 90s specifically to criminalize peaceful pro-life protest, particularly pro-life protests that involve demonstrations outside and inside peacefully abortion clinics. So last week, there were convictions for the first 5 activists who were charged with violations of the FACE Act. These activists, including 2 very young ones, were dragged off to jail, which is unusual before sentencing has even taken place. And they're sitting in prison right now. You can actually show your support. We'll show you how to do that at the link in the bio. But this week, there are 3 more activists on trial. That trial is ongoing. There's a very pro-abortion judge presiding over this trial. This is not getting headline news because, as you know, most of the media is very biased for abortion. But if you're in the pro-life world or you're adjacent to the pro-life world, you need to know about this, and everyone should know about this. Because the reality is, if you're an environmental activist, if you're a vegan activist, you're part of PETA and you're doing similar demonstrations that the pro-lifers are doing, except your target is, a factory farm, as an example, you're not going to face the draconian penalties that the pro-lifers are facing. Our government, because of the FACE Act, has put draconian, by draconian I mean like 10 plus year federal prison sentences for peaceful pro-life activism that not even environmental activists face for similar activism. So that's the state of affairs legally in our country right now to try to chill pro-life work. So today we're going to actually talk to Kristin Turner, a 22-year-old young woman and the director of community organizing at the Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising organization. It's called PAAU, and she's someone really special. She's been doing this work since her late teens, and she is very close with what's called the rescue movement. The rescue movement, which involves effectively civil disobedience to use one's body peacefully to put it in place, direct place between the abortionist and the body of the unborn child, the preborn baby that abortionist is trying to kill for profit. So the way this typically looks is sometimes it's sidewalk counseling outside the abortion clinic, but more specifically in these cases, it is sit-ins, peaceful sit-ins in the clinic or sit-ins in the hallway to stop the abortionist from reaching their prey. And these are done by peaceful, very often loving and sacrificial pro-life activists who are taking these risks in order to save lives. Kristin is going to explain the history of civil rights work using civil disobedience in this country, that tradition. She's going to talk about her friends, rescuers, who are sitting in jail right now, about the really sham trial that they just underwent by a federal judge who was very pro-abortion and refused to allow all kinds of evidence into the courtroom and mocked the pro-life defendants. She's going to talk about her own story, how she got into the movement. I think it's just a really important and compelling interview because I believe that part of the future of the pro-life movement is the loving, sacrificial actions of the rescue movement. Now, there are some in even the pro-life movement who are heavily critical of the rescue movement. They don't like civil disobedience because it's uncomfortable, because it's risky legally. I understand that. I don't think anybody is required to do any sort of legal risk-taking in the pro-life movement. There's plenty of pro-life strategies that don't require that. Live Action, as an example, does not do rescue movements, my organization. Instead, we focus on different pathways of activism as well as, of course, education. That's completely acceptable. It's normal to have different strategies in a successful human rights movement. But what I think is not acceptable is to heavily criticize and to disparage the loving actions of rescuers and to ignore the history and the importance of peaceful civil disobedience. So we're going to get into that in today's episode. For those who support the pro-life movement already, thank you so much. Your support makes a world of difference and is helping directly save lives. Let's get into this interview now with Kristin Turner. Kristin, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm very excited to be here. Excellent intro. I'm just excited to tell people about everything that's happening.
Awesome. Well, we're going to hear your firsthand account because you're very close to what's been happening. And I want to talk to you, too, about the history of civil disobedience here. I know that's a very important tradition in our country that the pro-life movement is proudly carrying out through the rescue movement. Can't wait to hear your thoughts on that. But I want to start with, you're 22 years old. You just, I think, turned 22, so happy birthday. You have been fighting now for life for years. Tell us why you're pro-life, how you got involved in the pro-life movement.
Well, I got involved in the pro-life movement after a string of very unfortunate events that I'm still dealing with to this day. When I was 16, I was abused by a 35-year-old man, and I thought that I'd become pregnant by it. And up until that point, I was outspoken in support of abortion. I did presentations at my school about why we need to support abortion. And it wasn't until I was in that moment that I thought that I was pregnant that I actually watched a live action video about what an abortion procedure really is. And it wasn't until then that I had seen the truth, the violent truth, that abortion is murder. And I knew that as a feminist and as a progressive that I could not support the killing of other people in order to liberate myself. And so I'm here today. It's been a few years since that happened. I started doing pro-life work in 2020. So it's been a few years, but I am happy to be here. And I can say that I've been welcomed into the pro-life community with open arms. And ever since I started doing pro-life work, I just have really changed the way that I see the world. I've seen brutal things and I've seen sacrificial love, and both ends of that has been absolutely chilling and a privilege to see.
Our sponsor today is 7 Weeks Coffee. 7 Weeks Coffee is the pro-life coffee brand. It is a gourmet organic coffee company that is making delicious roasts for you and is giving 10% of all revenue, not just profits, to pro-life resource centers. This means that $175,000 has already been donated from 7 Weeks Coffee to the pro-life movement. So if you're right now drinking Pete's or you're drinking Starbucks or you're drinking any number of companies that, by the way, support abortion, switch those dollars over to 7 Weeks Coffee, enjoy a superior cup of coffee, and know that your money is supporting the pro-life movement. Go to 7weekscoffee.com and use the code Lila at checkout for 10% off your order. That's 7weekscoffee.com. Well, I can't wait to hear some of those stories. I know you've seen, like you said, those brutal things, which I think people need to know about, and then that heroic love of some of your own friends. Kristin, when you first saw those videos and you became pro-life, how did you, we talk about sexual abuse sometimes on the podcast. We've explored it and investigated it at Live Action, exposed it. How did you get disentangled from that situation that you were in? What happened after you saw that video and you started to change your mind on abortion?
Well, I later found out I was not pregnant, thankfully, and my abuser was taken away. He resigned, and it's been a long, hard journey these last few years dealing with that, and it definitely still affects me. But I realized in this moment of suffering that I had the power to help people that had been hurt like me. And for me, seeing the unborn being so vulnerable, seeing them be dehumanized, and seeing them being treated as non-human, it struck a chord with me because I knew what that felt like. And so as somebody who went through that experience, it wasn't, this societal narrative. It wasn't that I was abused and because of that, abortion is the answer. It was I was abused and I relate to unborn children who are also being abused. Mm-hmm. And so it was in that moment where I had to leave school early. I couldn't graduate on my own time. I had to graduate high school early, so I never got to go to a ceremony or senior prom or anything. So it was in that moment of desperation when I realized that I could make a change for people who had been hurt and who are still being hurt. And I decided to start a pro-life group at my college, and I didn't even realize how controversial abortion was until I started talking with people about it and meeting new people. And it was really doing that college group that I got more connected with the pro-life movement. I met Teresa Bukovac, the founder of PAAU, and she introduced me to activism and actually doing things on the street and taking direct action. And since then, I've been just doing more and more to support unborn babies and to stop them from being killed.
When you had that transformation yourself with your mind being changed on abortion and you started your pro-life group at your college, how did friends of yours respond?
Well, unfortunately, at that time, I had lost my friends. A lot of people alienated me because of the experience that I went through. Many people accuse you of being a liar or, think that it's your fault and all these horrible things that survivors of sexual abuse have to deal with. And so at that time, I was feeling very alone. But the friends that did stick by my side, even though they didn't agree with me on the pro-life issue, they were still kind to me and they still understood why I was doing what I was doing. And they could see that my concern for the unborn was truly rooted in my belief that human life is valuable and it shouldn't be exploited. And they knew because, I had been friends with them for years, and I care about a litany of other issues like animal rights, feminism, the environment. They could see that my care for the unborn fit in perfectly with my concern for all these other groups of living beings.
The pro-abortion side likes to paint the pro-life side as completely monolith, that there's no dissent among other issues among pro-lifers. They're all just kind of maybe hardcore, red meat, conservative Christians, and you can't be atheist in pro-life, you can't be progressive in pro-life. But you and I both know that's simply not true. There's tons of atheists, progressives, and people of all different religious backgrounds or none who are pro-life. You're part of the Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising. You mentioned Teresa. She's the founder. I know her as well. She's a great person. Tell me about your work at PAAU. You now serve as their director of community organizing. What's some of the work that PAAU is doing? How did you get involved with PAAU?
I've been with PAAU since our launch in October, almost 2 years ago. And since then, I have really seen our work shift the pro-life movement. I originally got involved with PAAU when I moved to San Francisco to take over Pro-Life San Francisco, the organization that Teresa founded. And she moved to DC because she knew that going into the election that was happening, we were going to come out with a pro-abortion government, more so than we have ever seen. And she knew that going to DC was the right move and that she needed to found a national organization in order to take on Democrats who claim to care about human life while at the same time destroying it. And really, one of the only ways that we can challenge that in a really powerful way is by saying, no, I'm progressive and I disagree with you on the issue of abortion. And so she knew she needed to start a national pro-life organization that was progressive. And in October of that year, she decided to found the Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising. Since then, I have served as the director of communications, and then recently I became the director of community organizing. So for a long time, we were working really hard to get press coverage about how the pro-life movement isn't a monolith and how there are lots of people with lots of different views, specifically like our members of PAAU, who are atheists, who are vegan, who are leftists, who are feminists, all of these different viewpoints, but also understand that you can't kill people through abortion. It's not the right thing to do. So In our work through PAAU, we have changed the landscape of the media on the abortion issue. It's not just as monolithic as it has been in recent years. We hold a place of power within the pro-life movement, and not only that, we've also done incredibly powerful grassroots campaigns like our Justice for the Five campaign in exposing the truth of abortion by showing the victims of the abortion industrial complex. So in our work with PAAU, in less than 2 years, we have already, I believe, changed the landscape of the anti-abortion movement and the landscape of abortion in general and how we talk about it in our country.
How have you seen responses from other progressives? Do you feel like you guys are making progress? Have you seen in the last couple years people who were pro-abortion progressive switch, after seeing, hey, you guys are out there, you can be progressive and pro-life, and become pro-life and join PAAU? What's that landscape looking like?
Definitely. There have been a lot of people who have come to us, people who are in significant places of power within pro-abortion circles who have said, yeah, I actually, now that I think about it, I don't think I agree completely with my side. And I think that it takes that sameness and understanding that, we are like them, but we disagree on this issue. And they know that it comes from a place of good faith from us when we do disagree, because they know that we see eye to eye with them on other issues. So whereas there may be a stark difference between somebody who is pro-life and more conservative and someone who's progressive and supports abortion. If you're progressive and you don't support abortion, then you have a lot more in common with somebody who already supports abortion and happens to be progressive. They can see that you're coming at the abortion issue within the same framework. And for PAAU, that's an anti-capitalist framework. It's a feminist framework. And we are really working hard to show people that just because you are a progressive doesn't mean you have to support abortion. And in fact, being pro-abortion is antithetical to progressive values.
Can you explain why that is? I mean, if there's a progressive listening right now who is thinking, no, of course you're for full bodily autonomy for women, to do anything else would be a terrible injustice. And at the end of the day, the woman's rights, the pregnant person's rights, as they would say, is more important than the fetus's rights. And the fetus isn't fully actualized as a person anyways, right? This is the maybe most common argument. What's your response to that?
I would say I understand where they're coming from. That used to be my view as well. And the abortion issue is difficult because it is a conflicts of rights scenario between the person who's pregnant and their child. And so when we look at the abortion issue, we have to acknowledge that they have these reservations, but we also must explain that we can't violate the rights of somebody because they're dependent on their parent. We can't kill somebody because they're dependent or because they're underdeveloped or because of any of these reasons. And, we approach the abortion issue through a lens where we're anti-ableism. And I think that plays a big role in the abortion issue. People see the unborn as less than human because they don't have specific capacities or functions because of their developmental stage. And that's ableist. And we stand against that because whether or not you can perform a specific function or produce a specific thing or play a specific role in society, you're a fully valuable human being. Mm-hmm. And whether you're dependent on somebody, like, we see people who are twins who are conjoined, those people aren't less valuable because their body cannot be separated and maybe some of their organs are dependent on their twin's body. So we definitely approach the abortion issue through an anti-ableism lens, but we also approach the abortion issue through an anti-capitalist lens. This multinational corporation founded by eugenicists is now coming into our underprivileged communities and robbing them of opportunity to get out of this system of oppression. These underprivileged communities are not being afforded, the housing that they need, the food that they need, the healthcare they need. And if we can address many of these material needs, we will see that the abortion issue and the number of abortions will decrease significantly. We know that according to the Guttmacher Institute, a pro-abortion institute, that 73% of people seeking abortion cite financial concerns. And in my own experience doing rescues and sidewalk counseling, I've had many people say, yeah, I have this much money in back rent, and so I'm getting this abortion because if I don't, I can't pay the bills, I can't feed my other kids, I can't survive. And these survival abortions are part of a broader system of injustice. And as a progressive, you cannot support survival mechanisms that only end up hurting people in our community instead of actually addressing the core of the issue. And so for PAAU, we take an anti-capitalist position. We believe that people should be granted free healthcare, housing, food, all of these things so that they can be supplied with the needs that they have so that they don't need survival abortions or don't feel that they have to have a survival abortion. And of course, we also believe that it's antithetical to our progressive values because it's killing the little guy. In a literal way, it is killing the little guy. It's killing somebody who doesn't have the privileges that people who have already been born have. And so there's definitely several frameworks that we as progressives face the abortion issue through, and we believe that because of our progressive values, that coming to an anti-abortion conclusion is the right conclusion.
So I was at a activist roundup. This was a few years ago. I think it was hosted by CBS, and they had activists from all different causes there. And surprisingly, they invited a pro-life activist, but they had some, feminist type activists there. And one woman I remember, her name is Liz Plank. I don't know if you've come across her, but she's very talented and she's very pro-abortion. Unfortunately, she identifies, I think, as feminist, as progressive, but there is a sort of group of people out there who seem to identify very strongly as, of course, feminist and progressive and these different labels. But at the same time, and she also, by the way, says she's very anti-ableist. So she, I think, would resonate with that title and claim that title. I think she does important work on inclusion for people with disability, but she's very pro-abortion. And to the degree that she makes, TikTok videos that, get hundreds of thousands of views about how, this is how you get your abortion in, a state, there's limited abortion, and sort of really celebrating, normalizing, destigmatizing in every way possible the violence of abortion. If you were talking to Liz right now, who in some ways has a lot in common with the activists that you work with directly at PAAU, what would you say to her?
I would say that the unborn are not your enemy. They're not in conflict with you, and that affording them rights does not take away rights from you. And I know that it's difficult because it's a conflict of rights scenario, but in progressive circles, we often say rights are not like pie. Some rights for other people don't mean less rights for you. And we know that that's true with the abortion issue as well. Affording rights to the unborn does not take anything away from, the feminist movement, from progressive movements, from anybody involved in these circumstances. And we cannot solve the underlying causes of abortion by simply continuing to kill underprivileged children. And so if you're coming at it from a disability rights lens, I would say, that's completely inconsistent. You're saying that these human beings are less valuable because of their abilities and their level of development and the functions that they hold, instead of the fact that they're living human organisms. And I would also say that this multinational corporation, Planned Parenthood, in tandem with the abortion industrial complex, the police, the court systems that uphold pro-abortion rulings, all of these people working in tandem, they're not going to set you free. The only thing that can set you free is working together with your community to understand that the unborn are not your enemy.
I agree. Well said, Kristin. Public Square is the conservative or values-based Yelp for businesses that are pro-life and pro-family and pro-freedom. Right now, you're probably shopping any number of businesses. Maybe you're on Amazon and you're shopping from any number of retailers or outlets. The reality is many of these companies do not support your values. In fact, many of them actually oppose your values. Get the information that you need from Public Square. It's a free app that you can download about the companies that oppose your values and find a directory of over 75,000 companies that actually support your values. By downloading the free Public Square app today, you can browse thousands of companies that are pro-life, pro-family, pro-freedom, and you can find great new services to shop that are in line with your values. Join the pro-life economy today and download Public Square, the free app. All right, so part of your work has been rescue. Tell people what rescue is. There's different branches of rescue. We don't necessarily need to get into all the differences of the kinds of rescue, but what is the underlying goal of the rescue movement? How has it been operating? And then I want to get into the story of particularly Lauren and Herb, but then obviously there's other activists caught up in the charges coming from a very pro-abortion Department of Justice.
Yeah, rescue is, people define it a lot of different ways, but rescue is when you put your body on the line to save and to love an unborn child who is scheduled to be killed. And of course, like you said, there's lots of different types of rescue. More traditional rescues include sitting in front of doors, blocking hallways, that type of thing. The actual physical act of interposition between an abortionist and a child. And then there's other forms of rescue, which also happened back in the rescue days, but were less common, which include things like opportunity rescue, where you go inside the abortion facility, you counsel the people in the waiting room, you try and get them to not have the abortion, and you offer them alternatives. And then most of the time, you will leave before the police arrive or leave when you're asked. So rescue looks a lot of different ways, but generally rescue is putting your body on the line to save or love, or both save and love a child who is going to be killed. And when I was introduced to rescue, I had no idea how controversial it was. I saw a photo of a woman who had chained herself to the table at an abortion facility, and I thought to myself, that would stop a lot of abortions, and this lady looks really cool. And I knew that I wanted to do it because I wasn't so engulfed in this type of culture of safety and this culture of, playing it safe all the time. I obviously am a progressive. I'm willing to take risks and do kind of wild out there things. And I had already been involved with, environmental activism, animal rights activism, all this stuff where rescue also takes place. Rescue is also prevalent within the animal rights movement. And so for me, it wasn't a question of should we be doing rescue? It was a question of, how can I do a rescue for the unborn child who is scheduled to be killed that day? So there's a long journey of how I got there, but rescue is, in my opinion, one of the many ways forward and one of the many uniting points that the pro-life movement can connect on in this post-Roe era that we're in.
And the people involved in rescue, like even the people that are being persecuted by our government, and I'm going to get into the FACE Act here in a minute, they are from all different backgrounds. I mean, you have very different political beliefs represented among rescuers, but they all share the same foundation that human life is sacred and deserves equal protection, and we need to defend these babies.
Yeah, and even, like you said, we're going into the FACE Act later, but even on this recent trial that happened, I mean, we had one Jewish person, one atheist, and 3 Christians who were all on trial together because they could agree that human life is valuable and they need to step in and do something to stop those human lives from being killed and their parents from being exploited.
You look at the history of our civil rights movements in the United States, and you look at the history really of many human rights resistance movements. I mean, what Gandhi did and the civil disobedience that he practiced. And you see the common theme of I'm going to use my body peacefully to put myself in the way of the aggressor, or to put myself where I justly belong in order to protest the aggressor, right? So I'm referencing here the sit-ins as an example. You're not allowed to sit in this diner because of the color of your skin, but we're going to do this anyways. Rosa Parks, the famous story, I'm going to stay in my seat because it is unjust that I'm being asked simply because of the color of my skin to move. These are acts of civil disobedience using our bodies. The maybe difference with the pro-life movement is the people who are doing the sit-in are not, any of them, the victim themselves. The victim of the child in the womb, they can't do a sit-in. They can't practice civil disobedience in defense of themselves. They can't even speak out. Their vocal cords are, usually not even developed yet. They are completely dependent upon whatever actions and unfortunately affected by the inaction of the people who have the privilege of birth. So how do you think the history of civil disobedience in this country has impacted your view on the rescue movement? And what do you see as sort of the ongoing tradition that rescue has in our movement of continuing what the civil rights movement, the 60s, et cetera, started in this country?
Well, social justice is a science, and I think when I look at our movement right now, we're falling right in line with where many other social justice movements fell in line as well. Right now, I would say that, some people dissent to rescue, and it's not very popular, and most people aren't participating in it, but I also acknowledge that over history, Most protesters were not popular. The women's voting rights movement, labor rights movements, civil rights movements, they were never popular in their day. And it's not until decades later, when we look back retrospectively and ask people what they think of it, that they can say, yeah, I support that. And it's easy to support it when you're not right in it. It's easy to support it when it's not right in front of you, when it's not the life that you're living, because we are so engulfed in a culture that is against human life and an abortion culture that sets the pro-life issue as an exceptional one. You can do a sit-in, but not for the pro-life movement, or you can do a protest, but don't do it for the pro-life movement. It's like we have this weird exceptionalist framework for the abortion issue, and even pro-lifers have that framework, unfortunately. So for me, I was in support of abortion, and then I came into the pro-life movement with a completely blank slate. And I hadn't heard all these dissentist points about how the pro-life movement should go about things. And so I was open to trying lots of new things that we hadn't quite done yet. And, I think the words of Joan Andrews yesterday at her trial that she's currently on in connection with the 5 other activists sums it up pretty well. Today, the babies are dying today. The babies are not dying when we're ready to save them. The babies are dying now. And that's why rescue is important. You and me both, Lila, are from California, and we understand that our state is worth saving. It is worth staying there and fighting for the children there. And we cannot do that in a post-Roe America when there are laws that legalize abortion until birth. But what we can do is we can step in and we can rescue, because, if the FACE Act is repealed, these sentences are going to be much shorter. They're, of course, going to try and find other ways to prosecute pro-lifers, but we can see a large influx of people rescuing in California, saving babies that the laws cannot reach right now, saving babies that are dying today.
Carly Jean Los Angeles is a clothing company you've got to hear about. This is a company that not only shares your values and is founded by a mom of 4, but it's a company with clothing for the every woman. So you can find, regardless of your style or your size, you can find clothes that you're going to love at carlyjeanlosangeles.com. I just ordered another batch of clothing and filled up my shopping cart and can't wait for it to arrive. I'll show you some of this cute stuff on the show soon, but you're going to find everyday wear. You're going to find adorable dresses. You're going to find cute sweaters for the fall. All of it is ethically sourced, great styles, great price point. And again, this is a company that shares your values. Check out Carly Jean Los Angeles today. Join this company, and instead of shopping at Target, which is opposing your values, shop carlyjeanlosangeles.com. You can use the code Lila Rose at checkout for 20% off your order. Check it out. Buy something for yourself or for your friend or for your girlfriend or for your wife or for your daughter or whatever it is. Buy someone for that special someone in your life. And by the way, they have men's clothes too. So check out carlyjeanlosangeles.com. You're going to love the clothes, and use the code Lila Rose for 20% off your order at checkout. What's some of the impact that you've seen of rescues, either personally or firsthand accounts you've heard from friends, in terms of, okay, this rescue shut down the clinic or shut down operations for X amount of hours, and we're confident that it saved X amount of babies? What are some of the success stories of rescue?
We have seen huge success with the rescue movement. Just in the past year, we have seen, many babies saved. For example, we got a call a couple months ago from Emily Burning of Let Them Live. She's the founder there. And for those of you who don't know what Let Them Live is, they're an organization that helps provide material resources to mothers considering abortion. And, they've saved so many babies. And Emily told us, we're getting calls all the time from women who received your pink roses during these rescues. And our first reaction was, maybe that's happened 1 or 2 times. I'm sure it's not like a all the time occurrence. And she said, no, almost every single time you're doing a rescue, we are getting a call. And my heart just shattered, because I mean, I had heard for so long, rescue's not effective. It's not doing what it needs to do. Like, you're prioritizing yourself over the long-term impacts of what rescue can do. But I saw in those waiting rooms people turn away. I talked to those moms. I know that they were suffering, and there were so many times I was able to connect them with alternatives. And hearing these words and hearing that almost every single time we're doing a rescue, we're getting someone calling and saying, I don't want to go through with this abortion, I need help, that is worth it. And additionally, there have been many babies saved from firsthand accounts. For example, Lauren and Teresa, they did a rescue at Cesare Santangelo's abortion facility in D.C., the same place where they did a rescue and are now in jail for. They did a rescue years later there, and they talked with a mom there who said, I have $4,000 in back rent. That's why I'm here. And I mean, she was almost full term. That's what Cesare Santangelo does. He kills almost full term babies. And so they talked to this mom and they were able to provide the money for rent, and her baby was saved. Rescues are reaching babies that the laws and the pro-life movement are not reaching right now. Additionally, back in the rescue days, in the 80s and 90s, there were rallies where they would bring all the people who had changed their mind because of rescue, and they would have them bring their babies to these rallies, and we could see 80 to 100 children at any single one of these rallies holding their babies, and we got to see the actual tangible lives saved. So for anybody thinking, is this rescue thing even effective? It absolutely is, and I've seen it firsthand. And on top of that, I want people to know that, of course, these lives being saved is important. But what's also important is that these lives are loved. We know that babies are dying today, babies that the laws cannot save. But what we can do is we can tangibly love them in the moments before their death. If you were being pulled away to your death, you would want someone there physically with you, to be there in support of you, affirming your human dignity before you died. And when we rescue, of course it's about the babies being saved, but it's also about the babies being loved. It's about loving a child on their day of death. And the rescue doesn't stop after we're arrested. The rescue never stops. When you're arrested, you go to jail, and you get to sit in the place of a child in court who has been denied due process under law. You are standing in the place that they should be in. They should be afforded that trial. Then, when rescuers could be convicted and sent to jail, they continue by acting in solidarity with the unborn in jail. Many rescuers in the 80s and 90s did specific protests in jail where they refused to do anything that an unborn child could not do. And this helped disrupt the jail system and get rescuers out quicker. They would not talk to guards. They would not do any exams. They would not do anything but eat and sleep and go to the bathroom, because that's what an unborn baby can do. And when we rescue, we're sitting in the place of that child. We're going through the due process they're denied, and we're loving them before they're dead, and we're loving them in the moment of their death.
It's, I know, not necessary. I mean, to be a Christian, like you said, there's an atheist that was just convicted for rescue. But there's nothing more profoundly Christian than taking that radical solidarity with the least of these, who Jesus Christ himself identifies with. And he put himself on the cross in the place of the absolute least of these, the most hated and treated the most wretched in all of humanity for the sake of love. So it's taking on really the literal cross of Christ to love others. I see criticism of rescue from some pro-lifers, and it's hard for me to have patience for it, because I can completely understand the choice by pro-lifers. Live Action as an example, we don't do rescue at Live Action. I can understand the choice to choose a different strategy in the contribution that you want to make in the pro-life movement, but to in any way disparage or to criticize the incredible sacrifice and effective activism of those that are willing and feel called to rescue. I can't, it's difficult for me to, again, have respect for that position, because it just seems not only cowardly in that it is, criticizing from a place of legal safety, saying, hey, that's not me. I condemn that. But it also seems, irrational, because the reality is, psychologically speaking, if you are a woman and you are with all the conflict that goes into the abortion decision, you're seeking an abortion, especially, in the case, like you mentioned, a late-term abortion clinic like Santangela's clinic in DC. Many of these women, we know this in the pro-life movement, are deeply conflicted about their decision. They are going into that often with financial considerations or sexual assault that they endured or any number of pressures and coercions that they are feeling. There's a very rare woman who walks in saying, I can't wait for this abortion. And of these women that go in and these girls that go in, they're looking for a rescue. They're looking for a sign. They're looking for an opportunity for another way. And rescue is directly offering that. It's literally stepping in the gap. Yes, you can do this outside the abortion clinic through sidewalk counseling, but it's particularly dramatic and present when it's in that clinic. And as you have said yourself, yes, this has led to many lives saved. So I just see the power of it in saving lives. And so, what's your response? What is your response to the critics?
So many good points you made there. First of all, you're right about the people waiting in those waiting rooms. It can be really hectic outside when there's sidewalk counseling happening, and we love sidewalk counselors. I don't know any rescuer who's not also a sidewalk counselor, but sometimes it can be hectic with the escorts and with the cars going by and trying to give them this pamphlet, and they just want to get out of there. Their boyfriend's yelling at them, whatever. When you go inside, the walls come down. You quietly approach them and you offer them a rose. And for many of the women that I've given roses inside of abortion facilities, to me, you can see the look on their face that they've never even been offered that small act of kindness. No one's even thought to buy them flowers. And when you give them that rose, when you risk something, and they know you're risking something coming in there, the walls come down because somebody is going out of their way and risking something for them. To people who, say, I don't support rescue, that's not good for the movement, that's scary, I'm going to sit here behind my safe little screen and I'm going to put my head down. Babies are only dying when I'm ready to save them.
It's not just I'm going to put my head down. That's one thing. Choose your different strategy. That's fine. But it's I'm going to put my head down and spend my time and energy criticizing rescuers who are literally sitting in jail right now. Like that's the part that gets me. It's like, it's one thing to say, I'm not going to do rescue. Okay, that's completely acceptable. Live Action doesn't do rescue. Like that's, you have a different strategy that's completely acceptable. And there are multiple strategies needed to win this, 100%. But to sit there behind that safe computer screen and then to use your time and energy, instead of fighting abortion, to fight rescuers, that part I think is just unacceptable.
Yeah, and we're not going to win anything if we don't sacrifice anything. The reason that Roe v. Wade was overturned was because the rescue movement forged its way through. It created a political party that cared about abortion. And while, of course, I don't align myself with that political party, Roe v. Wade would not have been overturned without the rescue movement. Nobody would care about abortion if it wasn't for the rescue movement. Of course, there would be people who care about it. But if you look at the scope of our globe and different countries who did not have a rescue movement, you can see that America stands as a significant pinnacle above those other countries who didn't have a rescue movement. America, the United States, we have one of the strongest pro-life movements in the world. And I truly believe that is because of the rescue movement. And I have so many people reach out to me from countries in Europe, from countries in South America who say, I wish we had a strong pro-life movement like the US. And the reality is, I really believe those countries would be much further on the pro-life side of this issue if they had had a rescue movement. And like you said, you don't have to do rescue yourself. I believe that, there are some people who are specifically not called to do rescue. I think it takes a specific temperament to do rescue, especially in the current political and social state that we're in our country. I think you have to be very patient. You have to be extremely committed to nonviolence, even when you're being beat by abortion staffs. I think that it takes a specific temperament to do rescue right now, the way that things are. But what it doesn't take a specific temperament to do is say, I support you. I am gonna, be here in solidarity, even though I don't disagree with you. And as a progressive organization in the middle of what is considered one of the most conservative movements, we have had to work through our principle of unity through diversity. We have had to work with people we disagree heavily with on just about everything but abortion. But what we can agree with is that abortion is murder, and it's time to act like it. And so, really, what we're saying at PAAU is not that you have to do rescue, and if you don't do rescue, then you're not a good pro-lifer. What we're saying is that you don't have to do rescue. There's a space for you in the pro-life movement, but just don't speak out against people who are sitting in jail cells because they sacrificed something for an unborn child who was scheduled to die that day. And
100%,
I know, like you said earlier, it's very Christian to rescue, and I agree with that. And I read Joseph Foreman's book, Shattering the Darkness, The Crisis of the Cross in the Church Today, and he talked extensively about how rescue is very similar to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And at first, I didn't understand what he meant by that, but it wasn't until I dug deeper into it that I understood what he meant. And specifically right now, I'm converting to Catholicism, and I was in RCIA just last night. And I was thinking to myself, Jesus wants us to accept his love. He wants us to accept his sacrifice. And there was specifically, we were reading from Matthew, and it said, if somebody wrongs you, if someone sins against you, you go and talk to them privately. And if they continue to sin against you, you bring one or two other people with you so there can be no misunderstanding. And if they continue to sin against you, you bring the church into it. And that really reminded me of what I do as an activist, because really we try and solve these issues with as little friction as possible. But we know that that's not going to happen with the issue of abortion. And so we have to appropriately escalate and resist and bring that social tension to the surface. And when I think about my role as a rescuer, what do I want out of this rescue? I want the pregnant mothers and their children to accept the love that I'm offering. And in the same way, Jesus Christ wants us to accept his sacrificial love for us. And when we are rescuing, what a lot of rescuers said, specifically in the 80s and 90s, was you put your body on the line and you let the chips fall where they may. And for rescuers in this case that just happened, we can see that that included physical brutality. They were beat but with the sharp end of a broomstick. They were attacked. They were thrown against the wall. They were choked. They were treated horribly.
And they did not resist. And I think that's the incredible thing.
They did not fight back.
It's all, the movement is completely peaceful. And I think that part is lost in translation, certainly by the pro-abortion side, and the DOJ tries to paint rescue as somehow militant in a violent way. They are completely peaceful. And as you just described, they did not react when they could have fought back to defend their own, bodily autonomy, you want to use that term, their own protection of their own physical bodies. They did not fight back.
Yeah, and you can see, so there is, specifically you said that there was one of the charges, FACE. There was a special finding that the rescuers used force. The jury found that the rescuers used force in this case. And I think that that's one of the points that people have been kind of stuck on because they don't understand what that means. There was a scuffle in the hallway during this rescue because the rescuers were in the same group of people who were seeking abortion services that day. So the group was mixed together. And when the doors to the abortion facility opened, some of the patients tried to go through that door, and the clinic staff tried to slam the door shut. And these people seeking abortions being mixed in with the people who were doing the rescue start shoving them. And you can see that when the doors finally opened and the rescuers are coming in, that the clinic staff gets violent. The clinic manager came with the sharp end of a broomstick and started beating the rescuers with it. A few of the clinic staff grabbed rescuers by the neck, threw them against the wall, threw them into the chairs. Herb Garrity, specifically, one of the rescuers there that day, was grabbed by the back of their collar and thrown out of the abortion facility. And, I mean, some of these rescuers were elderly rescuers who clearly posed no threat, and the facility staff just did not care. They came at them violently, and I think that it was hard looking at that video to hear the jury say that it was the rescuers being violent, because you're watching your friends get treated like animals and you're watching your friends get beat by abortionists and their staff, and then they're being the ones called violent.
Wasn't part of the confusion there, I mean, the reason the jury included that conviction that there was a use of force with this case of Herb and Lauren and the others, it was that because they refused to be stopped, right? They did not fight back, but they walked through that door. They consider that force, even though they in never way touched or tried to in any way harm anyone else in the clinic. But in the process of them walking through the door and the scuffle, one of the abortion staff who are literally, fighting back with the broomstick and everything else, and the rescuers are being nonviolent in response, but they tripped and they hurt their ankle, something along those lines. And so therefore, because someone injured themselves, quite frankly, by reacting violently to the rescuers, they blamed that on the rescuers.
Yeah, that is what happened. So one of the nurses during the rescue that was happening, you can see her on the camera running across the waiting room, and she was never struck by a rescuer. She was never pushed by a rescuer. And you can see that clearly in the video, yet she claims to have sprained her ankle, then later claimed to have broken her ankle, and then went back to saying it was a sprain. She couldn't really get her story straight. But frankly, in her own abuse of the rescuers, she was injured, and the rescuers were blamed for that. And they were blamed for, a lot that day that was not their fault, including one of the people. There was a woman and her husband who came in seeking an abortion, and she was in incredible pain. She was in active labor because of the way that Cesare Santangelo does his abortions. And she comes in incredible pain and faints and falls to the floor shortly after she arrived that day. And one of the rescuers, who was a nurse, went to her and tended to her and said, you need to call an ambulance, you need to call 911. And from the knowledge that we had from the rescuers, the abortionist wasn't going to be there for another few hours. So she would have just stayed there in pain and active labor in the waiting room for hours. And so if the rescuers weren't there, she would have continued to stay in active labor for multiple hours in the waiting room. Yet the rescuers were blamed for her being injured because she collapsed on the floor while they were doing the rescue.
Do we know what happened to that woman, Kristin, and her baby?
So her baby was killed. The doctors told her that her child was disabled. Yes. So, or I'm not sure if it happened that day. It wasn't clear from her testimony. It sounded as if, yes, she did have her baby killed, unfortunately. And what she said in the courtroom during her testimony was that a doctor had told her, your child is disabled, has an abnormality, and you should go through with an abortion. And, many people go through this where the doctors say, you should have an abortion because your baby has some type of problem. And so she sought out an abortion, and in the video you can tell she's 7 months, almost full-term pregnancy. And she went there that day, and she was on the third day of her abortion procedure when the rescue was happening. And unfortunately, it did sound from her testimony that she went through with the abortion. I'm not sure if it was that day or if it was a later point, but because she was in active labor, I'm assuming that her child died that day.
So let's break down a couple quick things for folks listening who are not familiar with the FACE Act. And I just, I was texting with you earlier today, but today we just came out live action myself with an op-ed in Newsweek saying that, the FACE Act is unjust. It's being weaponized against pro-lifers right now. It needs to be repealed. What is the FACE Act, Kristin? Break it down for people here quickly. And then also I want to get into what happened at Santangelo's clinic.
The FACE Act, which stands for Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, was implemented in 1994 specifically because of the pro-life rescue movement. So in the 80s and 90s, there was a surge of anti-abortion activists doing and taking direct action at abortion facilities. And, many people don't know this, but the rescue movement was responsible for more arrests than any other nonviolent civil disobedience cause in U.S. history. So it wasn't women's voting rights, it wasn't labor laws, it wasn't the civil rights movement, it was the pro-life movement. And of course, we want to follow in the history of that, the rich history of activism over many movements, including our own. But at the time that was happening, the abortion industry knew it was over for them. And Joan Andrews Bell, someone who's been rescuing since the rescue days, before Operation Rescue, and still rescuing now, she's currently on trial in D.C., she said that, I'm friends with Bernard Nathanson, the man who founded NARAL, one of the largest pro-abortion organizations in the U.S., and she said that when he changed his mind and became pro-life, he told her that, the abortion movement knew it was over. We didn't know what we could do. There was nothing we could do to stop rescuers. And it wasn't until the FACE Act stopped rescue that the abortion industry was able to continue. So the FACE Act was implemented in 1994 to stop pro-lifers from rescuing unborn children and their parents. And basically what this does is it makes it illegal to block the entrance of an abortion facility. It makes it illegal to block ingress or egress. It makes it illegal to vandalize or commit violence against the abortion facility and their staff, which notably, these things are already illegal. So how does the FACE Act make that any different? Well, the FACE Act made these charges much larger. The FACE Act made it to where instead of getting, a trespassing charge or a vandalism charge or some other charge, now it's a federal crime. So the FACE Act itself, it's, depending on whether it's a misdemeanor or felony, you can get a couple years in jail. But the thing that makes it so difficult is that if you conspire to deny a right, the rights afforded within the FACE Act, that is where the real jail time comes from. So, conspiracy to deny the rights afforded within the FACE Act is what will get you jail time, which is what the rescuers were charged with. They were charged with conspiring to deny the rights and then FACE Act itself. So the FACE Act made it a federal crime to do a sit-in, but only if you're pro-life. So you can do a sit-in for any other cause at any other place, but if it's an abortion facility, then you can get 11 years in prison for it, which I don't even have to go into why that's a blatant violation of our First Amendment rights. It's clearly discrimination based on the specific message you have.
Yeah, I agree. It's absolutely insane, the double standard that's being wielded against the pro-life movement. It's always, it's been a pro-abortion law from the beginning, and it's being used to try to basically chill peaceful demonstrations by the rescue movement and by future rescuers. But I don't think ultimately it's going to have that impact. I think that it's going to only galvanize people to say this is absolutely obscene and absurd, and we're going to fight back peacefully. And, we're also going to call to abolish it because it's an unjust law. It is just crazy to think that there were additional felony charges and convictions levied against, just the 5 activists last week because they did it together. I mean, the fact that we do peaceful demonstrations together, they get federal felony convictions. I mean, to put this in context, murder is not a federal crime. You don't get federal charges for murder. Typically, it's a state crime, right? And so the amount that this has been escalated by the federal government, and then particularly under this administration, who is paying careful attention to this because they hate the pro-life movement and they want to throw the entire pro-life movement in jail. So they're going to use anything. But I want to talk about the particular trial that your friends just endured, this unjust trial, because the judge, the D.C. judge who presided over the trial, who, by the way, claimed to be Catholic. I mean, this is like a Joe Biden Catholic who's wildly pro-abortion.
She said that she graduated from CUA, which...
I mean, that's totally tragic. Catholic University of America. There are good graduates from that school too, but she claimed to be Catholic, but let's just talk through what she did. She herself has basically lobbied for abortion, which as a judge, that in and of itself should disqualify her from presiding over a case on abortion. But she said that the 13th Amendment, as an example, should be used to interpret this stronger sort of super right for abortion. Tell us about some of the injustices during the trial from this judge.
I mean, the courtroom was absolutely a clown show from the beginning of the trial. Of course, the whole courtroom was packed with pro-lifers, and the judge was very upset about this. She did not want it publicized. She did not want us there. She treated us horribly the entire time. And for me, that was just so... I couldn't understand it, because she released a decision before this happened. She released a briefing where she invented this constitutional right to abortion, and then she's surprised when it gets media attention and when pro-lifers show up in the courtroom. So like you said, she believes that abortion should be a constitutional right because of the 13th Amendment. And more specifically, she said that, when Dobbs addressed Roe v. Wade, it did not address whether abortion was still a constitutional right within other amendments. It only talked about abortion through the lens of the right to privacy, and said that it wasn't part of the right to privacy, which wasn't true. And Roe v. Wade definitely did cover other amendments, and the other justices did try to find other places in the Constitution that they could stick abortion in, but were unsuccessful because Roe was a bad decision from the beginning, grievously decided, as stated in Dobbs versus Jackson, the case that overturned it. And we know that abortion has never been a constitutional right. Again, something that was said in Dobbs v. Jackson. And so going into this case, the rescuers tried to argue that, well, we couldn't conspire to deny constitutional rights. We couldn't conspire to deny constitutional rights because abortion is not a constitutional right. And instead, they just went with, oh, well, you conspired to deny the rights that are afforded within the FACE Act. And the FACE Act was predicated on Roe v. Wade. The FACE Act was predicated on the fact that abortion is a constitutional right, which, as we know, it no longer is. And the decision that overturned that constitutional right even went so far as to say that it was never a constitutional right and that the law had been misinterpreted. So it's not just, oh, well, it was a constitutional right when you did this rescue. No, abortion was never a constitutional right, and therefore they are not denying rights given to people within the Constitution. But instead, they decided to go with, well, they denied the rights that are guaranteed to people through the FACE Act. And just from the start, she tried to deny any chance that we had at arguing our case. Any evidence we wanted to submit as to our intent for being there. She tried to, deny any constitutional arguments we had about the relevancy of Roe v. Wade, about whether or not the FACE Act was constitutional, anything. So from the beginning, she didn't even want to acknowledge that Roe v. Wade being overturned had some type of impact on this. She said that she didn't want to make a ruling on that before, so we're just going to exclude it. We're not going to talk about Roe v. Wade being overturned the entire trial. So going in, we're like, okay, great, we can't talk about our main point.
The part that was so mind-boggling to me, in addition to what you just stated, Kristin, is that, as an example, Lauren, part of her inspiration for doing rescue at Santangelo's butcher shop in D.C., where he's killing full-term infants, was a live-action investigation from 2012 and 2013 where we exposed Santangelo himself talking about how he would leave a born-alive baby to die in his clinic, talking about how he would not offer them medical care and he would let them die, and why women should not call the hospital or go to the hospital, clients of his who are part of the 3-day abortion process, if they have anything going wrong, because the hospital might deliver a live baby, and if the baby is alive, the hospital would care for the baby as is required by federal law. And Santangelo explained on tape why he would not help a born-alive infant from a botched abortion in his clinic. And so he's basically saying, I would practice infanticide, I'd violate federal law by not providing medical care to a born-alive infant in my own facility because he's being paid for a dead child. That's what he does. He's a butcher. He's a human butcher. And so this is what we documented on camera. We had an actual pregnant investigator, very brave, talking to him about her pregnancy, about her baby. And he's also describing in graphic detail about how he basically exsanguinates the baby. So he cuts the umbilical cord in utero to bleed out and to starve, basically, or to deny any kind of, basically, the baby isn't able to get oxygen and the baby can die and then bleed out this way. And that's how he murders these children. So it was just totally gruesome stuff. Lauren, your friend, watches this video, is totally appalled and brokenhearted. And this is part of her motivation going in to do, again, nonviolent, peaceful rescue at his clinic. That wasn't even allowed in the courtroom. That evidence, her testimony about that was not even allowed by the judge.
Yeah, like you said, the judge denied our motion to include this video, which was very important in establishing her intent for being there and the intent of the other activists who knew that Cesare Santangelo was using the FACE Act in order to defend himself from charges against him because he does infanticide. And to be clear, it's not just Santangelo. There are abortionists all over the country who are using the FACE Act to cover infanticide, including Eleanor Dry, who is an abortionist in San Francisco, who is harvesting the fetal organs of these children that she's killing. And Pro-Life San Francisco has been given the records by the lawyers from the hospital she does these abortion procedures at. So,
how late term are Dryer's procedures?
She claimed they were up to 24 weeks. Yeah, she claimed that her abortion procedures only go to 24 weeks. We know that children can be viable anywhere between 21 and 24 weeks. They can live outside the womb. But now that Proposition 1 has passed in California and elective abortion is legalized until the moment of birth, it is very likely that she's doing them later than that now.
And she's harvesting the organs of these babies.
Yes, so UCSF takes these fetal organs and they get the baby body parts and they give them to different people, including Advanced Bioscience Resources. So we know that multiple abortionists are using the FACE Act to defend themselves from infanticide charges. And I mean, it's just another Kermit Gosnell. And when people found out the horrors that were happening at Kermit Gosnell's abortion facility, they pretended like they had no idea how this could happen. And, you know, he's an outlier. He's just some horrible hack job abortionist who doesn't care about women, and he's only doing it for the money. When there are abortionists all around the country doing that. There were people like Leroy Carhart. There are people like Eleanor Dry. There are people like Cesare Santangelo who has committed these horrors and are continuing to commit these horrors. And they're getting away with it because of the FACE Act, because these activists are being prosecuted for exposing them and exposing them committing infanticide. And that video that the activists watched, it terrified them. And on top of that, this rescue happened in 2020. And for people who don't know, just the year before in 2019, another one of Cesare Santangelo's victims' bodies were found. The body of Philomena Grace, a nearly full-term baby, was found in the toilet of a Ruby Tuesdays because Cesare Santangelo had induced an abortion on her mother, and her mother ended up accidentally giving birth to this child in a toilet who ended up dying there. And it wasn't until paramedics came and retrieved her body that they found out that this child was killed via abortion. And, you know, nobody wanted anything to do with her body. They didn't want to do an autopsy. They didn't want to do anything to investigate it. And it wasn't until Missy Smith, a brave activist, stepped up and talked with these people who were dealing with the case that she was told it was from an abortion facility. And it was an abortion facility near where basically, the people who were dealing with the case of Philomena Grace said that it was at an abortion facility that this had happened. But Missy knew that there was not an abortion facility near the death of this child. And so she said, well, there's no abortion facility near there in Maryland. Where are you talking about? And they said, oh, it was actually from an abortionist in D.C. And Missy said, oh, Cesare Santangelo. And the people involved in the case said, how did you know it was him? And Missy, of course, knew it was him because he's notorious for butchering children. So on top of that gruesome video of him explaining that he would leave a child to die or kill them after birth, expire, in his words, he also killed a child whose body was found in Maryland just the year before this rescue. And when the rescuers tried to admit this video into evidence, the judge said no. She said that this video is propaganda and that they use the term abortionist in the video, which is a derogatory slur, which to me is just absolutely wild because I don't know anyone who considers abortionist a slur. That's just an abortion industry talking point, which I think perfectly portrays where she's at. She's clearly a mouthpiece for the abortion industrial complex, and she is working in tandem with them to make sure that these rescuers suffer as much as possible. This video was not allowed in evidence. Also not allowed in evidence was the bodies of Santangelo's victims, whether or not that was before the rescue or after the rescue, but...
Right, the bodies that Lauren and Teresa discovered, a whistleblower handed the bodies of over 100 children from Santangelo's butcher shop, and several of them were nearly full term and showed signs of illegal abortion. Maybe they'd been born alive. Some of these babies from the Justice for the Five expose, and none of this, none of the butcheries, the reality of what this clinic does and what was actually motivating these rescuers was allowed in the courtroom. And like you said, the reason for it, it's propaganda. The judge called, I think, Live Action's videos also propaganda, and she had no evidence for that. She had no reason. Oh, selectively edited. We have the full footage. You could have submitted
exactly,
and we
wanted
to submit the full
tried
footage,
to submit
unedited.
the full footage.
Yes, it's insane.
Yeah, we also tried to submit the full footage, but I believe they, don't quote me on this, I think they said it was burdensome to watch the whole thing. So they won't watch the whole thing, but they also say that the small part is selectively edited. And
so let's send these rescuers to jail for 11 years because we can't do our basic diligence as a courtroom. I mean, it's absolutely a sham.
Exactly. And the judge couldn't do her diligence in multiple areas. I mean, when Herb was testifying and said that there are abortion restrictions in D.C. and that partial birth abortion is banned, she said, that doesn't apply here. That's, that doesn't count, basically. And it was wild.
Yeah, didn't she kind of mock him for having an opinion about abortion law, saying, well, you don't know what you're talking about, and he actually did and she didn't?
Yeah, so the prosecutor gets up there to cross-examine Herb, and he said, are you aware that there are no abortion restrictions in the District of Columbia? And Herb said, there are abortion restrictions in the District of Columbia. And the prosecutor continued to cut him off and say, it's a yes or no question, it's a yes or no question. And Herb said, there are abortion restrictions in the District of Columbia. And the judge turns to him and said, no, there are not. And he said, partial birth abortion is banned federally. There's a federal law against it. And she said, that's not in the District of Columbia. That doesn't apply here. And the shock that went over the faces of all the pro-life people sitting in the gallery. I mean, we were all wearing masks because it's required in the courtroom, but you could see everybody's face change still with a mask on, be like, what is she talking about? Partial birth abortion and the federal law against it definitely applies in the District of Columbia.
It's
and
wild.
Then she turned to Herb and said, well, I guess that you're going to be the legal expert here. And, Herb didn't say this on the stand, but of course he's going to try and be a legal expert because it's his life on the line. It's 11 years of his life in jail that's on the line. And if she's not going to care about it, he clearly should.
Unbelievable. All right, so Lauren, Herb personally. Lauren, I think, was your roommate. She's a friend. She's a colleague. What was it like for you as her friend, watching Herb go through this and seeing your own friends hauled off to jail? Because that's what happened in the end. They convicted Lauren, and then before they've even sentenced her. I mean, this is a nonviolent offender. She's not committed any act of violence, but because of the way this kangaroo court system worked, she's literally in federal prison even before her sentencing. What's that been like for you on an emotional level?
It's been really difficult for everybody involved, just because obviously it's hard to see this happen, but at the same time, we are dedicated to radical joy, and we know that any time that we step out in the public and we are joyful and we continue to fight abortion, we know that that is an act of resistance against these prosecutors and these crooked judges who want to see us beaten down and sad and give up. But we're not going to give up. We're going to continue to be here, and we're going to continue to fight for the unborn. I know that on the day that all of the activists were taken away, Herb Garrity, Lauren Handy, Heather Idoni, Will Goodman, and John Hinshaw, we had been waiting around for days in the cafeteria of the courtroom, just waiting to hear a decision while the jury was deliberating. And for us, it had been a couple days, so we thought to ourselves, well, that's good. The jury is being diligent. They're really thinking about this. This is important. And of course, that's what we want because it's an important case. And we had heard that the jury gave a note to the judge. And beforehand, when they had done that, they were just asking a legal question about the statutes and other parts of the case. But this time, they said they'd given the judge a note, and we all rushed up to the courtroom. We were waiting, and several of the activists were holding hands in the gallery, just waiting to hear what it was, hoping that at least one of them would get off on any single one of the charges. And, the jury says guilty, 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 guilty on every single charge. And I think we were all just too shocked to feel anything. That day, I was the one who was setting up the press conference as soon as the verdict came down. So as soon as they said they were all guilty, I couldn't feel anything. I was just numb. And so I was like, okay, I have to do this press conference. So I rushed outside. I went to get all the supplies for the press conference, and I'd set it all up. And then it was taking a while for everyone to get out there. And, I thought it would be quick. And so I was starting to get worried. And then Caroline comes out and she goes, they took them. And I was like, what do you mean? And she said, they took them all. They arrested them. And apparently what had happened was the judge, as soon as the sentencing happened, said that there was a few matters she needed to research and that she was going to give us a couple minutes for a break. And when they came back in from that break, the judge said, actually, it turns out because of the charges and that you were found guilty on the force special finding under the FACE Act, you are going to jail now. And, it's out of my control. There's nothing I can do about it, when she clearly was happy to see that this was happening. And the prosecutors also advocated for them to be sent to jail during sentencing, even though they were clearly nonviolent and dedicated to nonviolence. And I will note that when Herb was on the stand and he was asked about whether he was committed to nonviolence, he tried to say several times, I'm the director of an organization our specific purpose is to fight violence and to be nonviolent. And the prosecutors objected many times and said, this is an argument for good deeds about the defendant and it's not relevant to the case. But then in the end, when they were found guilty and they were accused of being violent, clearly it wasn't just good deeds, it was something pertinent to the case. So the rescuers were taken away before sentencing, which is very abnormal when they haven't been held during the trial and before the trial. Usually if they're going to be held after the conviction, it's only if they've been found to be a risk during the trial or before the trial. So for us, this clearly seems like a political move. They're trying to scare us. They're trying to hurt our activists. And it's been hard since then. I think that it's hit us all very hard, seeing our friends be treated this way. At the same time, the rescue doesn't end when you go to jail. We've been in contact with Lauren every single day, and she's telling us, here's what you should do on the PAAU website, and here's what our new campaign should look like. And she's not done in the pro-life movement. She's still organizing, and we've set up an inside-outside organizing structure so that she can continue to contribute even after she's been put in jail. And, we are all just fighting so hard right now. Our vision is so clear for the future. We need to repeal the FACE Act. And we know that if we continue our efforts, the FACE Act is done for, and babies in all these states where they cannot currently be saved will be rescued. And I just have a lot of hope for the future.
I do too, Kristin. I do too. I think the FACE Act days are numbered. I think that these convictions will be overturned. I think these, they will, there's certainly appeals happening, but I think there will be pardons in the future. It's absolutely insane that it's gotten to the place that it's at, but I so admire the courage of the rescuers. I admire your courage. How can people follow your work, Kristin, and support your work in PAAU?
So currently there's still 3 other rescuers on trial, and there will be 1 more rescuer on trial for the same rescue. So they ended up splitting into 3 cases. Right now, Jonathan Darnell, Joan Andrews Bell, and Jean Marshall are on trial, and later Paulette Harlow will be on trial. So continue to support these rescuers. You can catch up with the trial and see what's going on by following PAAU on social media. Our handle on every social media platform, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all of that is PAAU Now, PAAUNOW. And you can follow us anywhere online. And then we also have a new Twitter account that is specifically for following updates on whether the FACE Act will be repealed. So you can follow us there if you type in PAAU repeal FACE updates. It's right there on Twitter. And we have a lot of big stuff coming, a lot of big stuff ahead of us. And I really do believe that rescue will live on. And we're hopeful of this because rescue is not just a tactic. Rescue is a way of life. And it is, in the words of John Hinshaw, one of the rescuers in jail right now, the most psychologically appropriate response to what is happening, to the killing of little babies. And we know that if a baby is dying, we must step in and do something about it. So if you want to keep up with our work, follow us on social media. We have lots of good stuff always coming out. We are constantly updating our website, posting new content, explaining rescue, telling you how you can get involved, and really anybody who's willing to put their hand in the circle and say, I'm willing to help, is really amazing. So thank you for the support already, and for anybody who is watching this who wants to support us.
Thank you, Kristin. And people can donate, right? People can donate to PAAU, your 501c3.
Yes.
And that will help your activists be able to do their courageous work to reach more people with the truth about abortion and get more progressives as part of the pro-life movement.
Yeah, so currently we have a resource on our Instagram that gives you information about how to donate to all of the rescuers who are in jail to help them, make phone calls and get food. And we also need donations at PAAU. We have a lot of big work coming ahead, and our activists actually all live in one space together. We are in a community together. So if you want to fund our community and help us to continue doing direct action, to continue to forge a path forward in the pro-life movement and to save babies, donations are always a great way to do that.
Thank you so much, Kristin. Godspeed.
Thank you so much.
Well, that was inspiring, talking to Kristin. It's clear that she is compelled by a deep love and conviction about the value of every child and every life. And I think that's something we can all share, a love and a care for those that are most vulnerable, and something that we can also prayerfully consider, what's my role in the movement, in the pro-life movement? What can I do to love that child and love that mother and love that family that's in need? I think we all have a role to play in the pro-life movement. It's going to look different for all of us, but I think we all have a role to play. So I'm just very grateful for the diversity of this movement, about how many different people have different calls and important approaches, all of them nonviolent, of course, to love and serve the preborn child and to advocate for their right to live. You can check out PAAU's work at the link in the bio. Also, liveaction.org, my organization, which is reaching millions of people every single week with the truth about abortion. And we're also reporting heavily on these cases over at Live Action News. Go check it out. Thank you all so much for listening. A huge shout out and a huge thank you to our new Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome. I really appreciate you. We are growing our Patreon. We're going to be doing an exclusive live stream at the end of this month for new patrons. So go check out our Patreon at the link in the bio and become a member at any amount. We'd love your support so we can help to grow the podcast. Again, don't forget to subscribe to the Lila Rose podcast on YouTube. You know how to do that. Click subscribe. If you're listening to it on podcast, give us 5 stars and leave a review. That will help the podcast reach more people. And don't forget to share this podcast with a friend or family member to get them inspired and aware about what's happening right now in the pro-life movement. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.